Okay, hi everybody. So we're just going to do some annotations on checking out my history. I just want to make it really super clear at the start of this video that I will make some notes and annotations on my copy, but what you really need to be doing when you're studying this poem is pausing the video at appropriate points and actually embellishing on the notes that I make. I will write annotations, the basic ones that I need you to have, but what you really need to do is to fill them out more, flesh them out based on the things that I say, because I won't be able to write down absolutely everything that I say, which is why you're probably going to need to pause the video at certain points and just add to your own ideas, just like we would do in the classroom. Okay, so we talked a little bit about in the context video about the Creole dialect, and we talked about where this comes from and this Caribbean voice that comes through in the calypso rhythm. I just want to start off by talking about the form, which isn't something that I always draw loads of attention to, but I think it's really important in this poem. What you will see, if you just look at the poem that's sat in front of you right now, you might be thinking, well, I can't really talk about regular stanza lengths, and there's lots that are indented and there's stuff in italics, and that's really important. What we've got here is a mixture of stanza forms. And that is significant, really, because they suggest that the narrator is breaking confining language rules that he's been taught. And I think that's an important thing to note, that if we think about the study of the English language and we think about how people see English people and the way in which we speak and we write, we are taught, or we certainly were taught, very precise systems of grammar and spelling, and that is what the colonised education system would have been exposed to. So these colonised people would have been exposed to the British way of talking about language and punctuation. So I almost think that the speaker rebels against that. So make sure that you're pausing and writing these things. But you need to be aware that I think that the fact that these stanzas are so irregular shows a kind of speaker rebelling against this such strict structure that he's been taught. What you'll also notice, and I think this is quite clever and quite an insightful point to make as well, is that the stanzas that are actually, see down here, in italics, these are the parts that discuss the Caribbean heritage and the Caribbean history, and you'll notice that the lines seem a lot shorter on the page physically, and I think this has been done by Agard to reflect the limited knowledge he has of the Caribbean history. So he's trying to show that this is a lot shorter, the syntax, the lines are broken really, and I think that is done to mirror the broken history. So I'm just going to jot this in, that you'll have a lot more to write. So broken lines mirror the speaker's broken history or fragile history. And so that gives you an insight into the impact that this use of form actually has on the poem. Okay, so let's go straight into it. If you look at the first stanza then, I mean, it's ever so embarrassing me trying to read this without an accent, but dem tell me what dem want to tell me. Now, you've got this repetition. Now, what you will see is that they're just two short repeated lines. And in fact, I mean, you can talk about the technique that is used here. I don't want to spell it incorrectly, but it is what we would call epizeuxis. I don't even think I've said that right, so absolutely forgive me if I have made a bit of a mess of that. But it's a type of repetition. So you've got here, I don't want to spell it wrong, think. Now it's different to anaphora or anaphora, whatever you want to call that, because these are lines that are repeated. So it's things like horror, 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 where you've just got the little phrases repeated, so you remember that that's taken from Macbeth. Now I think that this is really important to talk about. It's all very well using the fancy high-level terminology, but if you don't do anything with it, then you're going to come unstuck. So you need to be aware that Agard starts his poem with this dem tell me. Dem tell me what dem want to tell me, because it becomes emphatic. He emphasises it, and what he's emphasising here, look at this distinction here, the separation between them and me. So straight away it feels like there's a battle going on between two groups or two people, and it's the them and the us they tell me. And it's not made exactly clear who the them are, but I think what we are aware of is that it's the policy makers, it's the people who are in charge of the British education system. They tell me what they want to tell me. Okay, so it's not what he wants to know. It's the idea of being told something. And I think if you're told something, can you ever reply? You are told that this is happening. Does it signify that the speaker feels trapped potentially? And these are all suggestions that you would make. Okay, so we come on through. Bandage up me eye with me own history. Blinds me to me own identity. Now, you've got the language here. Bandage and blind. Oh, look at that smudgy there. Bandage and blind. A bandage helps to heal. These are the notes that you need to be making. A bandage is there to help heal, and it covers a wound. Now, the irony of this is that this bandage creates an illness of blindness, or this bandaging creates what the speaker feels is a disability. So it's quite ironic. So you are going to have to write about that. I'm just going to jot down ironic so that you're aware why there. Bandage up me eye with me own history. He's talking about bandaging, so it's a verb in this instance here. Blinds me to my own identity. So he thinks that the bandage used to heal is actually causing a greater disability to the speaker. Okay, it doesn't seem to be done for like kindness or healing purposes, which is what we would usually consider a bandage to do. Now, obviously, blind me to my own identity. This is a metaphor for not allowing him to see his full identity. Okay, so it's a metaphorical blindness. I haven't actually blinded him. A metaphorical blindness. The idea that he feels lost, that he can't see things, he can't see where he comes from. We come on through. I think, really, where you talk about this idea of identity, you've got the idea that therefore, your personal identity is very deeply bound up with your heritage. And I think this is what he's getting at. So I think the question he's really asking is, how can he form his own personal identity when he lacks knowledge about his own heritage? Okay, I've broken my rule there and done a longer note than I should have done for you, but there you go, so kind all the time. We go back to the Dem tell me about 1066 and all that. Now, we spoke a little bit in the context video about the use of Creole dialect here. Agard refuses to conform and use that standard English that he would have been taught within the education within the schools. And I think this is, again, a distinct rebellion to actually say, no, I'm using this dialect and I'm going to write in this way because this is the way that I have been brought up. And there's quite a lot to do with sort of oral tradition, that people will have learnt things from their ancestors, and this is the way they've always spoken, and this is the way that the speaker potentially would have spoken in Guyana or one of the other colonised Caribbean islands, and so he maintains that he is going to write in this way. Okay, so there is this, you've hidden my identity, but this is what I have got, so I'm going to continue to use this identity. Okay. Then tell me about 1066 and all that. This feels very dismissive, doesn't it? All that and all that, like it's superfluous knowledge, which it would have been to them. Then tell me about Dick Whittington and he cats. But Toussaint Louverture, no, them never tell me about that. Now, Dick Whittington and his cats, if you've ever been fortunate enough to go to a Christmas pantomime, you'll be aware that that's a very famous figure. But pantomime is low-stakes theatre in itself. So by using an allusion to Dick Whittington, Agard makes British history seem trivial. Like, that's what they're teaching him. They're teaching him about pantomime figures. And it really shows that actually this was not important to these colonised people. Okay, so Dick Whittington's cat. So I'm just going to write here pantomime. You can write something about the type of theatre that this was, and that Agard trivialises British history through this illusion. Okay, through the illusion. They never tell me about that. So he's not even had a snippet of people who were really important to their own history and their own heritage. And then we get this indentation here, the broken syntax, showing the importance of oral communication, the way that they would have communicated, and it almost feels like a bit of a chant here, this repetition. You've got Toussaint, a slave with vision, lick back, Napoleon. I mean, it sounds like it sort of bursts out. You can see that this is meant to be spoken. It's not meant to be read, and that complies with the oral tradition of the people. You've also got this idea of vision and a beacon of the revolution, and what we've got here within this Caribbean history are the images of light, which contrast really heavily with the images of blindness which are up here. So we've got these contrasts of light and dark, which you need to be talking about. I'm going to use the term dichotomy because I think it's better than contrast, and I think you're able to use it. So the dichotomy of the images of light and darkness, where the darkness represents the blinding of the history, being left in the dark, only having these sort of trivial British history, and then the light of the hope and the things that they want to see within their own heritage and their own history. So we come on through. I mean, if you physically look at it on the page, and I know we don't often talk about, you know, things like this, but the fact that it is indented and it feels like a chant, almost feels like it's brushed inwards. It's not mainstream. This history was not mainstream, part of the mainstream education, and it's only a really minor point, but I think it's just worth you being aware about that. How well you can analyse that, I'm not entirely sure, but I think just for your own knowledge, you should be aware of that. Okay, coming down to the bottom of the page, then tell me about the man who discovered the balloon and the cow who jumped over the moon. And these are nursery rhymes that he talks about here. Tell me about the dish ran away with the spoon, but then never tell me about Nanny de Maroon. What you've got here, you've got this rhyme that comes through really strongly. Now, we've talked about rhyme quite a lot previously, the idea that actually nursery rhymes, the origins of nursery rhymes, they sound quite upbeat, sound quite jolly, sometimes can feel quite throwaway, but underneath some of the most poignant nursery rhymes are actually quite disturbing tales of truth, quite horrific images. Ring a ring of roses, pocket full of posies, a tissue. You've got this we all fall down, and we've got these images of sort of plague and black death and all of these awful things that happen to people, and they kind of sung about them to make them not be such a dark reality. And I think that's exactly what Agard does here as well. When he uses the rhymes to describe these elements of British history, he makes them sound quite childish, and I think that shows Agard, or the speaker, questioning whether he actually needs to know this over the history of much more diverse figures such as Nanny de Maroon. So I'd like you to make a point here and make a note that the rhyme trivialises. And I would like to say, don't just copy trivialises ... that you need to have an explanation in your annotations about how the rhyme trivialises the British history that he is taught. Okay, so when you're actually filling that out and you're doing your annotations, that needs to be a little bit more densely populated. So pause now. Come over then onto the second page. Just make sure that you can see it all. Look at this technology being absolutely terrible for me. There we go. And he goes on, and we've now got another little bit of indentation about the history, and this is the comment on Nanny de Maroon. Nanny, sea-far woman of mountain dream, fire woman struggle, hopeful stream to freedom river. And I wonder, Nanny de Maroon, sea-far woman, she had a vision of the future, and that contrasts really with the short-sightedness that Agard, or the speaker, has been provided with. They can't actually see the future, okay? So the contrast with images of the speaker's future. Alright, it's quite light and bright. Next stanza then, tell me about Lord Nelson and Waterloo, but never tell me about Shaka the Great Zulu. Tell me about Columbus in 1492, but what happened to the Caribs and the Arawaks too. Now, I think this is probably one of the most pointed things. We talked about the theme of colonialism in the earlier video. They tell me about Columbus in 1492. They don't tell me about the Caribs and the Arawaks too. Now, You might know the rhyme, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Now this is when Christopher Columbus sailed the seas and found all these undiscovered islands that they never knew about, they never knew were there. Now what you've got to be aware of is that Columbus was a European coloniser, and this is what's talked about. So this is probably quite a bit of embittered history, okay? So this would be quite bitter to the Caribbean people. He was a European coloniser, and what has happened here is that he is compared to these other cultures that tried very, very hard to resist slavery. So what happened to the Caribs and the Arawaks? What happened to them when Christopher Columbus tried to come over and colonise where they lived and their place of habitat? So you need to be talking about this. Now what you see here is this closeness between these figures. Yet the gap between what they did was massive. You can't see all of that, can you? And he's almost talking about, well, you've taught me about Columbus, but you haven't actually told me the real truth about what went on. And I think this is where we talked about Caribbean poetry being tainted with these awful, horrific images of slavery a lot of the time, and I think we just need to be aware that he drops it in there. It's quite a pointed comment. We come on through, and you get the picture is that what Agard is doing is he continues the sort of pattern of talking about British figures that were taught about within the colonised education system, alongside really sort of figures that they were really proud of within the Caribbean heritage. We come on, then tell me about Florence Nightingale and She Lamp, and how Robin Hood used to camp. Then tell me about Old King Cole was a merry old soul, but then never tell me about Mary C. Cole. Now we've got two figures here that are set against one another. We've got Mary C. Cole and we've got Florence Nightingale. And you know, they tell me about Florence, I don't know her whole name. They tell me about Florence Nightingale and She Lamp and her lamp. I mean, Florence Nightingale did a lot more than carry a lamp round, but I wonder if this is where the anger comes out, that this almost feels like a trivialised image. And I'm sure that the education system taught them about the successes of Florence Nightingale and the style of nursing that was carried out there, but the trivialised image comes from this bias, this, well, you haven't taught me about me, so I'm just going to say that that's all you taught me about. So might talk about this being a bit of a biased vision as well, if you will. How Robin Hood used to camp, I mean, them, whether we would actually now classify learning about Robin Hood as being really important to our awareness of the world, I'm not sure. I mean, it's part of our cultural heritage, isn't it? But whether actually this was the most important thing for these children to be taught, we're not really sure, and I think that is what the speaker questions. Old King Cole was a merry old soul was he. But then never tell me about Mary C. Cole. Now that's another figure that you will be looking up and being aware of what Mary C. Cole did. What you've got here is this idea of British folklore and nursery rhymes compared to real life figures who did so much. Mary C. Cole did so much, and I think that's almost like where the speaker's able to suggest you think that British folklore and nursery rhymes are as important as some of the most, I don't know, the most revolutionary people that we've had from our countries, and that's what you compare them to. You think it's more important to teach us about the nursery rhymes, and I think that's probably where this embittered tone actually comes from. So going on through, we've got some more. From Jamaica, she travelled far, the Crimean War, she volunteered to go, and even when the British said no, she still braved the Russian snow, a healing star among the wounded, a yellow sunrise to the dying. And then we get a little bit more information about Mary C. Cole. So as Florence Nightingale was tending to the soldiers within the war, this is also what Mary C. Cole was doing. She was like a nursing figure as well. But what we've got here, Crimean War. The idea of the Crimean War was so much more relevant and real than the scenes from white history to these people in learning about their heritage. So the Crimean War is much more important than the battlefields of France, for example, to these people. They don't need to know about all of this white history. Even when the British said no, and this is showing really that some of these figures were really defiant and really, really brave. And they were able to stand up for what they believed in. And this is almost reflecting the fact that the poet and the speaker within Agard's poem are standing up for what they believe in by writing this verse and by talking about the fact that you've told me this, you tried to hide my history, you tried to hide my identity, and now I'm fighting back. Okay, she braved the Russian snow. A healing star. This is a nice metaphor, isn't it? Stars, they provide light, they give hope, but they're also sort of caught in orbit, aren't they? So some of these figures were caught, and they couldn't escape this sort of pattern. So I think that's worth being aware of as well, if you want to read it as a dual meaning. So you've got light, hope. Stuck in orbit, and you know the stars also burn out, don't they? They burn out and they become nothing. You know, I'm not no physicist, but after a while the stars cease to exist, and I wonder if that's what the speaker suggests, is that are we just going to forget about our own history? Is that what we hope, that we're just going to buzz around for a bit and then it will burn out and it will die out? And I think actually that was probably one of their greatest fears. Okay, a yellow sunrise to the dying night. This idea of sunrise, this new hope, and then we finish in a very similar way to the way we start. So it's almost like Agard has to express all of the things that he's frustrated about, or he represents all of the things that these colonised people were frustrated about, and then he makes a decision about what he's going to do about it. So Dem tell me repeats those monosyllabic lines. Now these monosyllabic lines are important because they sort of really emphasise the point. Dem tell me. It feels very angry in the way in which they'd be spoken. So the monosyllabic lines are important then. And it links back to the speaker's anger at the start. This anger is still present. It is not dwindled. It's not faded in any way. Dem tell me what Dem want to tell me. And we've got the whole repeated from the first stanza. But now, and it's like, well, I've gone through this. No one's going to teach me this, so I've made this decision and this bit of this turning point here, this volta. But now I'm checking out my own history. I'm carving out my identity. It's a very emphatic and confident ending. To the poem. He uses his own history to create his own identity. So it's almost like I'm going to have to check out all of these figures and then carve out my own identity. Now this idea of carving, this verb carving, it's almost like he's going to have to craft it. It's going to take time and skill, but also it's almost like he's going to get this perfect vision once he's carved it out and he's taken the time. If someone's done a carving, it's something that they're going to be very, very proud of. And I think he's maybe showing like that actually what he's going to create, this history that he's going to uncover and he's going to create for himself, is going to be this piece of artwork, something that he will admire and be proud of. So yeah, that is checking out my history. I'm also going to link over some more reading so that you can actually flesh this out with some higher level ideas as well. And I also am going to set you some work to look up these figures so that you understand exactly why they are so significant when compared to the sort of rhymes and the folklore of the British history that is presented to us in this poem by Agard.